All right, everybody, welcome on in to the Auburn Daily Show. Lance Dawe here with you, episode 11 of the Auburn Daily Show. Episode 12, check that, man. Always get my episode numbers confused. It's crazy that we're already 12 episodes into this thing. Kicked it off with a bang. Really excited to be here with you guys today. Got an interesting topic for you guys. So obviously, spring practice has essentially come and gone. We're going to get to talk here a little bit about, just kind of wading into the offseason and what that looks like. Gregory Lawrence in the chat here tuned in. War Eagle to you, Gregory. Really appreciate you stopping by to listen. Today, we're going to be talking about some backups for Auburn football that we should be paying attention to this offseason, in fall camp, and also during the actual season. And then also we're going to go over a quarterback that Auburn almost got, but decided to commit to another school. Look, if you're not already following us on the socials, go ahead and do so at SI_Auburn on Twitter is where you can find us. Then also you can follow us on Facebook as well at Auburn Daily. We stream every single weekday at 4 p.m. Central Time on Twitch, on YouTube, on Facebook. See some of you already watching on all three of those platforms right now. So let's go ahead and get into it. Actually, what's up, Hot Man? Good evening, Lance and all. What's going on? War Eagle underrated. Glad y'all are here in the chat. If y'all have got any thoughts as we go here on everything that I talk about, I'll definitely be reading chat, definitely be getting y'all's thoughts as to what we could potentially be looking forward to. Before we get into the 5 backups to watch for Auburn football this upcoming season, I wanted to briefly discuss a quarterback commit that has chosen Clemson over Auburn, Georgia, and a few others. You can go read about this over at auburndaily.com. I believe I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. I'm not great with last names. Christopher Vizzina, I believe is how you pronounce his name. So he has been an Auburn target for quite some time now, here from the state of Alabama. Played high school ball in Birmingham, cut his list down to 6 different teams. Auburn made the list, Georgia made the list, Clemson made the list, Notre Dame, and a couple of others. And then he eventually decided that he was going to commit to the Clemson Tigers. We noted on yesterday's show that he was likely a Clemson lean. We didn't really get into it. We just noted that he was a Clemson lean. 2023 quarterback, 4-star prospect from the state of Alabama. And this is what John Garcia of Sports Illustrated said about Vizzina. The timing has to favor the Tigers, which along with Ole Miss had him for on campus 3 times each. Talking about Clemson here. The Tigers of Clemson, not the Tigers of Auburn. But in reading the tea leaves between Clemson University and other programs, it's Dawe Swinney's staff that may be most all in with the ascending talent, who broke out with a 31-touchdown junior campaign against strong competition in 2021. It definitely stinks that Auburn wasn't able to pick him up, but all things considered, and this is actually all things considered, I think that Auburn's quarterback room, they're not in the greatest hands right now. There's not necessarily one star guy that you could point to, and I definitely think that Vizzina could have been an interesting pickup. And then Gregory Lawrence notes, path to playing time is a lot clearer over there than Auburn with a Lake. Still hurts. And he also knows, that it was inevitable. I didn't really think Auburn was truly in the race for this kid, at least during the recruiting process that I was seeing. But congrats to Clemson for picking him up. We noted this on yesterday's show, and I just kind of wanted to briefly talk about it here. Underrated and I had a conversation about this yesterday, is that Auburn in the 2023 recruiting cycle really needs to start to pick up the pace in state. There was a ton of talent that Auburn, I'm fearful, is going to miss out on. They're going to pick up some guys. Don't get me wrong. They're going to eventually start to get into some crystal ball predictions for some of these guys. It's still very early in the recruiting cycle. But I think that for this season, they need to start to kind of establish themselves. And then for future seasons, they need to try and build a foundation of not necessarily establishing dominance within their own state, because obviously you're going to have Alabama and Georgia taking some different players, right? But you need to be able to kind of hold your own. It's your state, along with Alabama's, but it's your state. You need to be able to pick some guys up like Christopher Vizzina, these 4 stars in the future. And underrated comments here. Vizzina commits to Clemson, not over, I believe, till signing day, but Auburn has to get after players early in their recruitment from this point forward. Got to do better in timing. I think that's a very good point as far as where Auburn is right now on the recruiting trail. So they've got 2 guys in their class. We talked about Terrence Love, the 4-star safety committing to the Tigers, and he was somebody that I believe Auburn had jumped on early. And after listening to the Locked On Auburn podcast earlier, I got to hear Zach Blackerby have a conversation with Charlie Five, just talking about how initially Love was actually waffling back and forth on when he wanted to commit. And just like a few days or a couple weeks ago, he decided to just kind of like back off and wait. And now he's finally like, okay, I am going to commit to Auburn. But it's nice to see Auburn jump on a prospect like that and then finish. And I do hope he's able to stay with Auburn through the entire period. And I believe they will. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't. But Auburn has to do a better job of getting on some of these kids early and sticking with them until the very end. And I'll be honest, I think that you could have excused year one. You could have excused the class that Harsin had to salvage, that Malzahn had left him. Obviously, Auburn just kind of had to pick up the pieces with that class and do everything that they could at the very end to make it look somewhat decent. And I think they did. But this past season, we didn't really see Auburn hit the recruiting trail in the way that I would have liked to have seen them. Now, the way that I would have liked to have seen them do it may not objectively be the right way to do it, but it seems to me that there's a lot of the fan base that's really concerned about the recruiting for the Tigers moving forward. And I think that Auburn will adjust and they will start to, and underrated, and I were talking about this yesterday, they'll start to create some connections with some of these high school coaches here in state. They're going to start to build that foundation. I don't think Auburn's just recruiting without understanding that we need to start getting some guys from our own state. I think they know that, and I believe that they're eventually going to get those players. Gregory also comments here, I'm not too certain about the Auburn Brock Glenn kid that we offered after we knew Vizzina wasn't aboard. Plays for a private school here in Memphis that doesn't face too much competition. I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot about Brock Glenn other than the fact that his first name's Auburn. He's like, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's undersized. He's like 6'1", 195 or something like that. We've got a piece coming up on him in about an hour and a half over at Auburn Daily. If you guys want to go check that out, auburndaily.com. Locked on Auburn, Zach Blackerby, what's going on, man? In the chat for today's show, talking about Christopher Vizzina committing to Clemson over Auburn. And this is something that Zach actually says at the very end of the article. New offensive coordinator Eric Keesaw was the lead recruiter for Vizzina despite getting him on campus not too long ago. The Tigers brought in Holden Garner to be the quarterback in the 2022 class and has received nothing but great response for Auburn's coaches, players, and media. And that's kind of what I wanted to lead this back to kind of get to end this on a positive note here. I think that while there isn't a particular standout type of player on Auburn's roster at quarterback right now, you've got to like what you see out of the room. You've got to like what you see out of Robbie Ashford. And I think you had to have at least appreciated what you saw out of Holden Garner. Now, I will say there were a couple of different media outlets out there, we're not going to name names, that claimed that Holden Garner was the most impressive quarterback on the field during Auburn's spring game. And I would have to disagree with that because if you go and look at the film, you'll notice a couple of things. Even the announcer noted the touchdown throw that he threw, it was a little bit underthrown. And I think any good defensive back, I think that's a batted ball at worst. And it might have been an interception at best. I'd have to go back and check, but it was underthrown. And Landon King had to go up over him to actually get it. Just an incredible athletic play from Landon King. But whenever you watched Holden Garner work his way down the field, it didn't really look like he was making a lot of pre-snap reads. It looked like he was immediately taking the ball and looking to his right. I don't think I saw him once look to the left for a read. It was immediately look to the right and get the ball out. Props to him for knowing the play and knowing what was coming and just getting the ball to the player that he needed to. But there was no pre-snap look. There was no analysis of the play beforehand. It was just immediately take it, get it to the guy. I'm also, I said this on yesterday's show, not a huge fan of Robbie Ashford's mechanics, nor am I a huge fan of Holden Garner's mechanics, the sidearm stuff. And then Ashford has a really, really long wind up. And you can praise the individual quarterbacks for things that they did. Like, I wouldn't say Holden Geriner was inaccurate. That last throw was slightly underthrown, but overall, I mean, you give him time to develop. He's still just an incredibly raw freshman. Give him time to develop. I'm excited what he looks like next season or 2 seasons from now if he's ready to go and be Auburn's guy at the quarterback spot. So I don't know anything about Brock Glenn. I've not watched any tape on him. But if you say, Lawrence, that he plays for a private school that doesn't really face a lot of competition, so you got to really question whether or not he's preparing himself to be an SEC caliber type of quarterback, I take your word for it. Underrated says to recruit within the SEC, if players didn't enter the portal before February 1st, they couldn't transfer within the conference, so we can forget offensive line transfers from rival teams. That only hurts more. Yeah, and I heard Zach Blackerby talk about that on his show today, about how, we can forget potentially picking up one of those 2 offensive linemen from Georgia, I believe, which is a shame because I think they definitely would have been definitely would have been huge for Auburn's offensive line. But you can't get those now, and so I think that now you just have to assess what you have on roster with the offensive line, and you just have to say, okay, I've got all these different guys, I've got my personnel. I just need to figure out which guys work with who best, and they're going to have time to figure that out. They're obviously working through that stuff right now, and they've got injuries, so I think they're doing the best that they can there. So yeah, there you have it. Christopher Vizzina. Again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. I believe that I am, though. But committed to Clemson over the Auburn Tigers. All right. This is what I wanted to get to today, because I think it would be an interesting conversation to have, especially considering we've got quite a few people watching right now. So again, if you guys have any thoughts on these different players, or if you have extra players, Stewart says we can still get grad transfers from within the conference, though, right? I believe so. I may be wrong on that, but I believe that is the case, Stewart. I would have to I'd have to go do a little bit of research. Speaking of a little bit of research, underrated, you asked, I don't know if it was yesterday's show. Locked on Auburn says, yes, we can. I don't know if it was yesterday's show or the day before. You were asking who would you want to see at kick returner and punt returner. Also, Tavares Dawson. I think that he could get some looks at returning kicks and punts. Got a little bit of speed there. You got to make sure that he, as a youngin, does not drop the football, but he could be somebody that we see returning kicks and punts this season. James Waldrop says, I think you can get them. They just have to sit out a year. Yeah, I believe that is the case. So Auburn, what they're going to do on the offensive line this year, I think they've just got the guys that they're going to have to work with, and they're just going to have to live with that. But I'll say this. I think Auburn is definitely doing a good job with the targets that they have on the offensive line. Stanton Ramel is somebody that they're looking at right now. They've already got a commitment from Braden Joyner, who was an in-town prospect. So I think Auburn's doing what they can to salvage the O-line situation. And after the mess that Gus Malzahn left, I think Harsin is doing what he can to make sure that works in the future. Stuart Donald says Texas A&M just had a wide receiver grad transfer hit the market. Is it that former 5-star? I don't remember his name. I have to go pull it up. We may talk about that tomorrow. But if they've got wide receivers if they've got a wide receiver that has hit the portal, Auburn should at least take a look at him. We talked about that yesterday. Just talking about how the Tigers need help at a variety of positions. And I don't know if they're going to be able to necessarily find that difference maker at wide receiver in the portal, because they already whiffed on Corey Rucker. And I'm not saying that just to get on to Auburn. I mean, it is what it is. Let's just face it. So we'll see. I'm sure that there will be several guys that enter the portal here over the next couple of months that Auburn could be potentially taking a look at. All right. This is what I wanted to get to today. So it's 5 backups that Auburn football that you should be paying attention to for Auburn football in 2022. Put this up about an hour ago over at auburndaily.com if you want to go read it. You can check it out there. I'll probably put the link to it in the description after the show is done. But I wanted to go through these 5 guys here and maybe get y'all's thoughts on these 5 backups to pay attention to. I want to start here at the top with the running back, Sean Jackson. Before I get into Sean Jackson specifically, I want to address the fact it's like, well, why did I not put Jarquez Hunter here as a backup to potentially watch next season? I kind of wrote this article leaning in the direction of these guys wouldn't necessarily be breakout players, but based on their situation, I think they would come as surprises. And I believe they're going to produce more than people might think they will. And I think that'll end up being a surprise for some people. Jarquez Hunter's kind of already had that moment after rushing for over 500 yards last season. And then I note in the article, the reason I put Jackson instead of Hunter is not because I think he's going to outproduce him. I just think when Auburn gets into short yardage situations, they need somebody to spell Tank Bigsby, right? They need somebody that can be that physical back that can pick up that short yardage, that 1 or 2 yards, 3rd down and 1, 3rd down and 2. They could give Sean Jackson looks over Jarquez Hunter, who was really easy to sniff out for opponents as the season went on in 2021. So I'm not saying that Jarquez Hunter's a bad running back. I'm just saying when he got onto the field, opponents honed in on the fact that, like, okay, he's probably going to get the ball in this type of situation, so let's go ahead and shut that down. So if you can also try and potentially put Sean Jackson on the field in some short yardage situations, maybe put both of them in the backfield, maybe put Tank and Jackson, try and run that type of set. I think that would be interesting to kind of throw people off a little bit. But yes, Jackson's stocky frame. He's got a powerful running style. It should earn him a couple of looks this season, even in conference games. I truly believe that. Sean Jackson, somebody to potentially look at. Underrated says, what's your take on the storyline that Coach Harsin's future moving forward depends on his pick for quarterback number 1? Or the powers that be or those behind the scenes cutting his legs out from under him before he can succeed? I think that Harsin, I don't know. I'm sure. Let's say he's in a make or break season this year, and he's got to be able to win a certain amount of games, and that's going to come because of the person that he chooses to be quarterback number 1. I think that at the end of the day, his decision is significant, and it's going to be very important. Although I will say, I wonder how much influence people outside of Coach Harsin and Eric Keesaw have on who's going to start at quarterback. Because I'm going to be quite frank with you, I don't know how to feel about the quarterback battle between Bo Nix and Malik Willis. I'll just say that. So I wonder what his decision-making process looks like with that QB. So if he's not 100% responsible for the guy that he puts out there, do the boosters still criticize him for it or fire him for it? I don't know. But I think that when you look at last season underrated, you look at those final 5 games that Auburn lost, and you look at those final 3 games specifically, I feel like if you get just slightly better quarterback play against Alabama, South Carolina, and Houston, I think you could win 2 of those games, likely, potentially even 3. So I think that it's going to be very important for Auburn, who is going to be a fringe bowl team, at least from a prediction standpoint. They're going to be a fringe bowl team. I think it's going to be very important that Auburn makes the best quarterback decision possible, because if they get into those tight situations, they need that guy out there. They need the right guy out there. So, yeah, I would say that the storyline that his future depends on his pick for quarterback, I would say that it's somewhat accurate. Of course, football's a team sport. Everybody's got to be pulling their weight in the same direction. It's not just like the quarterback is the only reason that a team succeeds or fails. Also got to look at what happens on defense, and we talked about on that on yesterday's show. Does Auburn's secondary do exactly what they did last year, which is give up a lot of 3rd down conversions and a really high completion percentage and really wear the defense out? Because a quarterback can only do so much, right, on the defensive side of the ball. In fact, he can't do anything. He can try and hold the ball so that the defense has a little bit of time to rest, but that's essentially all he can do. Stewart says, I swear if Auburn rolls out on 4th and 1 with 3 tight ends and a wishbone backfield, I'd be giddy as a schoolgirl. Oh, man. Yeah, I'm curious to see what the personnel decisions look like for the Tigers this season. Because I mean, just going back to what we were saying about personnel here, but if you don't necessarily like what you have on the offensive line, right? Get that jumbo package in there. Get those three tight ends there. Three tight ends in there. Underrated also says, especially if we won the Iron Bowl, we wouldn't be having this discussion. That's exactly right. I think that Auburn could have gone 7-5, 7-6, 8-5, but if they had beaten Alabama, nobody would be having this conversation. I genuinely believe that the boosters would not be having that conversation, because if you beat Alabama in year one, you're doing pretty good, right? You're doing pretty good. And while this wasn't one of Alabama's most impressive teams that they've ever put together, in fact, I would argue that it's the second worst that the Crimson Tide have. It's the second worst team that the Crimson Tide have fielded since 2010. But yeah, if you had beaten them, nobody would be saying anything. Now, if you had beaten Houston, well, it wouldn't have been Houston, because if you'd beaten South Carolina, you probably would have played UCF maybe in the Gasparilla Bowl. Was that what the bowl that they played in? You wouldn't have played Houston in the Birmingham Bowl. Austin says, so glad Mike Bobo isn't going to be calling third and short or fourth and short plays anymore. Yeah, you and me both, dude. Just look at that South Carolina game. Like, if you get better quarterback play in that game, you probably win. But also, if you hand the ball off to Hank Bigsby whenever he's just absolutely eating, that'd be pretty sweet too. I can't remember the statistic from the South Carolina game, but Tank got like almost no touches in the third and fourth quarter of that matchup. And it was one of those moments where it's just like, okay, the quarterback that we have right now, I mean, the offense is going to be mid. If you continue to let him do his thing, why don't you hand it off to our star tailback? Maybe get the offense going that way. And it's just like, nope, we're throwing it. 4th and 1 against Penn State. Nope, we're throwing the fade. And I don't know if any of you were here whenever I was talking about it a week or so ago, and I'll bring it up here because I think it's just entertaining. So I was discussing Mike Bobo on the show a week and a half or so ago. And I remembered, because I was discussing about decision-making. I was discussing just the decisions that Bobo and Arson made with the offense at different points of the season. I was talking about the fade against Penn State. And I remembered that there was an article that Athlon Sports put out in 2016 about the fade. And Mike Bobo was mentioned in it. So I went and I dug through my closet. I went to pull out this Athlon Sports magazine from 2016. And I found what Mike Bobo had to say about the fade. I thought it was just really entertaining. His point in the article, and he was at Colorado State at the time, he was like, well, back at Georgia, we never called the fade just to call the fade. And it was typically not pre-scripted. It was not like we have our set play and it's like, okay, we're calling the fade now. It was never that. He said it was always situational. And even then, they really didn't like to throw it on late downs. And the article went and explained statistically, this is what happens each and every down if you try and throw the fade. It was very, very, very unsuccessful on 3rd and 4th down. And then Brian Harsin in the post-game presser, why did you throw the fade on 4th down? It was something that we had scripted. It was something that we had planned. I just thought that was really entertaining. Just the contrast between 2016 Mike Bobo and 2021 Mike Bobo with Brian Harsin. It's just like, no, we know what to do with the fade. We don't throw it on late downs. And we sure as heck don't pre-script it. And then Harsin's just like, yeah, that's what we were going to call. It's just what we did. Anyway, Austin Price also says the South Carolina game didn't really feel like a real game, if that makes any sense. That I actually really, really do resonate with that. It all just kind of was just a weird atmosphere. And also with the announcers that they had, and RG3 being weird, and it was just all. It was I agree. I think that's a really good assessment. It just didn't really feel like it was actually happening, and I was shocked. I remember saying going into that year, I feel like there's no way we lose to South Carolina in back-to-back seasons. Also hated the fact that we were playing in Columbia in back-to-back seasons because it was it's an underrated atmosphere in the SEC. I was actually last night, and this may just show just how much I either love college football or how much I obsess over it incorrectly. I was watching a 2014 game between Georgia and South Carolina with Dylan Thompson at quarterback for the Gamecocks. Really, really fun game. 38-35 was the final score. Georgia could not prevent the Gamecocks from getting like a 4th and 1. It was a really exciting game there at the end. A lot of offense. But yeah, the atmosphere is really, really good in Columbia, South Carolina. Yeah, the end of the season didn't necessarily feel realistic. And so I think that Auburn, if they get a little bit better quarterback play, could turn their season around this year. And we've talked about the schedule before on this show. Get your first 5 games at home. Wherever you start, get to build him up, right, through those first 5 games. Competition gets progressively more difficult, in my opinion. And I think that if you get through those first 5 games relatively unscathed, 4-1, 5-0, fingers crossed, I think you could be in for a good year. And then Underrated says we have the talent to win 9 or 10 games right now. Comes down to every player making plays when they have the opportunity, especially in our secondary. That Penn State game really frustrated me. And Harsin talked about this during the spring game, and then after it was like, well, I think that now that we've gotten some work under our belt, I think the most important thing for us now moving forward is execution. It's all about how does everybody go out there and execute, and do they do it correctly? Do they make the right decision? I think that that's a really good point about the secondary in the Penn State game. Although I will say, it was like, as much as everybody wants to hate on Derek Mason and his zone coverage, and it really did stink, I think that it was more of an issue of the fact that Auburn had a roster full of players that, from personnel standpoint, knew how to run a press man-to-man type of system where they had a lot of cornerbacks that really were thriving in press situations. And I think that the defensive coordinator, the defensive unit, was trying to get this personnel to do something that they weren't accustomed to doing. And so 3 games into the year, they were still working on that. And now had they had the personnel to run a zone scheme, which people have success with zone, it's why people run it. Otherwise, everybody would just run man-to-man all the time. I think that once Auburn kind of adjusts their personnel, gives Harsin a couple of years to kind of shift the type of recruit that he wants, to kind of shift it in the direction that he wants, I think the Tigers defense will be just fine. But yeah, I think that it's going to be really important that after this offseason, the players are at least all on the same page, despite whether or not they played in Steele's system or not. And then Hotman says USC fans have gotten worse and worse over the past few years. This year's game, the Gamecock fans, particularly the students, were very profane. Yeah, you're gonna see that at South Carolina. You're gonna see it at LSU as well. You're gonna see it at Georgia as well. I've learned over the past few years, and y'all may disagree with this, Alabama fans are absolutely unbearable. And I've seen some things on Twitter recently that have reminded me of that. But it's not like they're the only fan base in the SEC that is absolutely obnoxious or annoying. In fact, there have been moments where it's just like, I think that LSU's might be a little bit worse. I think that Tennessee's, South Carolina's, they might be a little bit worse. Of course, then I always get to go back on Twitter and get to read what some Bama fans are saying and be like, nope, nah, Alabama's still pretty bad as well. Underrated says, got away from what they said we were going to do, heavily run game. And I agree with that. But to go back to what I was saying about the type of player that you have on roster, the offensive line situation was bad. And so you can either criticize the coaching and not being able to develop these guys, or you can also criticize the fact that it's like, well, the offensive line situation was also just so bad. Auburn was not put in a situation to run block successfully on a consistent basis. And so I agree with you, Underrated. They got away from that 4th and 1 mentality that Brian Harsin always talked about, right? And they stepped up to the plate on 4th and 1 against Penn State and threw a fade. Just completely whiffed on a really easy pitch there. But I think that, and they did it against South Carolina, I think that Auburn is going to try and establish the run game a little bit more this season. We got to see them run all over the non-conference opponents early in the season last year, but it would not shock me if we get to the end of the year and Auburn's offensive line has not really progressed from where they were last season in terms of run blocking. And we are all collectively saying, yeah, Auburn had to throw 35 to 40 times a game to win. They had to, because the run blocking wasn't there. And I'm fearful that by the time that Tank Bigsby graduates and leaves, or if he goes to the NFL draft next season, it's going to be a big what if for Tank Bigsby. One of the best running backs from a recruiting standpoint to come through the program. It's just like, if we had gotten him in a better situation, what will it look like? I'm fearful that that is a possibility, that this year we can't establish it despite the fact that we want to. But who knows? Auburn may run for over 200 yards a game. I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that's the case, because if they do, the offense is going to be sweet. Hot Man says, when I was at the Auburn LSU game in Baton Rouge, Stidham senior year, the LSU fans were great before the game. After, not so much. I hope they played neck. I want to see that in person. Josh Pate of 24/7 Sports was talking about that the other day, just talking about the environment with LSU fans and about how hostile it is during the game and then after the game. He said, I remember walking into the stadium and being like, before the game, and be like, I feel uncomfortable. I genuinely don't feel at home right now. And it's one heck of an environment, and the fans certainly are passionate there. And like Hot Man said, sometimes they get a little riled up. All right, let's try and get through some of these other potential 5 backups to watch. Cam Riley is another one that I wanted to look at. A-Day defensive MVP. He's going to be backing up Owen Papo and Eugene Asante, transfer from North Carolina. But I think his upside, even though he is a junior or a redshirt sophomore, I may be wrong on that. His upside is still certainly there. 6'5", 215 pounds. He's an absolute load. I don't see a reason why Auburn wouldn't put him out there to kind of take the load off of Papo a little bit. See what he can do. I'm excited to see him, especially given his physical appearance. He could line up on the outside. I think he could also be good in run stopping. Cam Riley, somebody to watch. And then also Landon King is somebody that I think we should be taking a look at. He made a name for himself last season. He caught that really big overtime touchdown, in last year's Iron Bowl. Auburn this spring, from what I've heard and what I've seen, we got to see it in A-Day. Working him at tight end. They're working him in the slot a little bit, and they're also working him on the outside. Caught that touchdown pass on an outside route in the A-Day game. And even though John Samuel Schenker will be starting at tight end for the Tigers, and I do think that Schenker is going to get a lot of targets this season. Also, you notice with number 25, I've talked about before on the show, like you notice, or I'm not a huge fan of number 25, right? At least for Schenker, for him to make the move from 47 to 25 just didn't make a lot of sense to me. But now that he's wearing it, after seeing him in the spring game, he looks like one of those traditional Auburn, like one of those classic hybrid H-back tight end type of guys. And I think the 25 actually suits him. I actually like it after getting to see it a little bit in person. But Schenker's going to be catching a lot of balls, I think, for the Tigers this season. But Landon King's also going to be able to get his own. I think this is a potentially a breakout year for him. Talked about Cam Riley's size. You got to love Landon King at 6'5" as well. I think he's going to be a target for the Tigers in some important games this year. We got to see it in the Iron Bowl. Jason Jones at defensive line. Talking about massive human beings here, just continuing the trend. Jason Jones is sitting currently at 6'6", 320 pounds. He's going to be playing nose tackle for the Tigers. Does he start? Maybe. I would put my money on Marquise Burks starting. That may be an incorrect thing to say, but I would expect Burks to start the season. At some point, I think Jason Jones is going to be able to take over that role at nose tackle. If he doesn't already take it in fall camp, but as of right now, I believe that he would be sitting behind Burks. Again, I may be wrong in saying that and predicting that. But one more guy here. Yeah, one more guy on this list. Caden Bridges, defensive back. By the way, if you guys have any potential breakout performers or any backups that you think are going to potentially play a bigger role than some people might think, you can leave them in the comments. Just give your thoughts on it. Caden Bridges, though, defensive back, despite being the lowest rated player in Auburn's 2021 class, Bridges has been receiving some positive feedback throughout spring training. He's a former three-star safety that is currently backing up Zion Puckett. Zion Puckett not really had a whole lot of opportunity to really establish himself in a starting role during his time with the Tigers. So I would expect that Bridges kind of splits time with him in the fall. If what we're hearing out of spring is true, and he's going to be able to kind of take that next step heading into his sophomore year, yeah, I think he can get some playing time. He's looked solid in the spring, reportedly. Underrated says that the offense improves enough to stay in the game, this can be a villain team to create havoc in the SEC. Last season is only enough for redemption. The defense can only do so much, as we learned. Yeah, I'm really, really hopeful that the offense is able to take the next step. I hope that we're not as inept running the football as we were last season. Again, I said earlier, I'm fearful we will live in a world where that's true and they will continue to be inept running the football. But if they figure it out, whoever starts at quarterback, I think is going to be able to have a decent time because they can lean on that, right? Especially during early on in the season, they can kind of lean on that. And then they can use the passing game whenever they feel like, not because they have to. I think that was an issue with last year as well, is they would utilize the passing game when they didn't need to. It was more important to just stick with the ground game, kind of control the clock a little bit. Underrated. Can't wait till Camden Brown and Amari Kelly. I agree. Those are two guys that I was looking at the depth chart earlier, looking at those two guys. I'm like, man, those could be potential guys to step out onto the field and make some plays for the Tigers this season. Jay Fair, another one, right? And I believe Cam Brown's like 6'3". And Amari Kelly's like 6'2". Auburn needs a little bit more size in their receiver room. They need one of those physical jump ball guys like Seth Williams. I'm not asking for him. I'm just saying arriving in the fall. Okay. I want to see Auburn get one of those guys on roster. And Zach Blackerby, Locked on Auburn podcast, he's talked about this recently. It's like, who's going to be Auburn's outside option? Because statistically, while Shedrick Jackson, you may say, oh, that's going to be that guy. Auburn couldn't really work it down the field to him on the outside. Wasn't very good at that. He was more of a in the middle of the field, kind of a possession receiver type of guy. And so I think that Auburn's going to have somebody step up at that point, at that spot this year, whether it be Malcolm Johnson Jr., whether it be Camden Brown or somebody like that down the road. I don't know, but they need to get that guy on roster is what I'm saying. They need to find a way to put that guy on the roster. Whew. All right, guys. I think that's going to do it for today's episode. It's crazy how many people have showed up today to talk about what's going on. If you aren't already, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the show, go and follow Auburn Daily on Twitter at @SI_Auburn. If you're not following us on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe there, please. If you're watching on Twitch, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook at Auburn Daily. And then you can keep up with all of our content coming out at auburndaily.com. Going to have a lot of different off-season stuff coming up in the upcoming weeks. It's going to be a really fun off-season. Normally, people like to talk about, like, well, I don't like the off-season because nothing's going on. There's plenty to talk about. There's plenty to speculate over. We're probably not going to get to records or anything like that until like August or July. But we can talk about all that different stuff. We can speculate for sure until that gets there. Thank you so much for watching, Hot Man. I really appreciate all you guys coming to watch today. I really, really am looking forward to watching this show grow a little bit. I'm really looking forward to getting to interact with some of you guys come the season, because talking about some football while it's happening, it's the best season of the entire year. But anyway, guys, thank you again so much for watching. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of the Auburn Daily Show. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and God bless.